back to the program. What's next? Your host, Steve Blazin, and I've had way too much coffee today. I'm here with Tad Mason. Tad has worked in the forest industry all his life, and being an old lumber guy and a builder myself, you know, we hit it off right from the start. So go ahead, introduce yourself.
Sure, Steve. Tad Mason. I live here in Carmel. Been working in the forest management side of things, primarily in the West since 1979. I have a degree in forestry from UC Berkeley, and I've been fortunate enough to stay busy since I graduated.
1979. Well, you've been doing this forestry industry for a while.
For a little while, yeah. And I've been really blessed. I've been able to maintain work in the private sector. I worked in the public sector briefly, fighting fire back in 76, 77. And I realized after that experience, I really didn't want to work in the public sector, and thought I'd give the private sector a shot, and it's been good. I really enjoy it.
So like the forest industry,
right?
Or conservation, or now we've talked a lot about the lumber mills that you deal with, had dealt with, and
right.
That alone, I mean, you know, as a child, I've told you this before, growing up in Michigan, you know, I used to sit there in my dad's lumber company and watch train cars full, one after another, full of dimensional lumber, and you know, where's all this coming from? I mean, we're just a little tiny lumber company. You multiply that times how many small mom and pop lumber companies, plus the big box stores and everything else. Where's all this wood coming from?
Right,
and it's coming from you.
Well, it's coming from sustainable forest management, and you know, truly here in North America, we're really blessed with a temperate climate, especially California. You know, almost a Mediterranean climate that grows trees very well. I've got some projects going now in the Southeast U.S., Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, and they are growing trees down there like you would not believe. And you know, with rotations of 30, 40, 50 years, it's basically just a long-term crop, and as opposed to an annual crop, of course. So the work I'm doing in the Southeast is looking at what to do. How do you utilize all the sawdust and the bark and the byproducts from those sawmills into a product that adds value? And that's, you know, pretty interesting. A lot of the work I do today as a consultant has to do with finding markets for undervalued forest material. As you go out and thin the forest, of course, the saw logs go to the sawmill, right? But the top of that tree and the limbs and the smaller trees that are thinned out when you're in there in the forest doing the thinning, what do you do with all that material? So since the mid-'80s, I've been involved in renewable energy projects that seek out forest biomass to utilize it as a feedstock for a thermal process where you're creating steam and spinning a turbine and creating power at scale, up to 50 megawatts of power. That's about enough power for 50,000 homes. So that's sort of on the large end of power generation for biomass, for forest biomass. But also what's interesting is the emerging markets these days for forest material to create things like fuel pellets that can be shipped off to Europe or the UK as a substitute for coal. And that's really has ramped up in the last 15 years. And now I'm working with clients that want to create those fuel pellets and then export them to the Pacific Rim, because Japan and China have signed on to address climate change. And one way to do that is to switch out fossil fuels with renewable fuels.
Right.
And wood is renewable, as we know. And so that's kind of an interesting business model that's developing. British Columbia has been doing it for a while, where they're creating pellets and actually shipping. They've been shipping them to Europe through the Panama Canal.
Oh, no kidding.
Right, but recently
And there's enough profit in that. I didn't
well,
mean to
there
cut you off.
is, and you start to get concerned about the carbon intensity of that fuel pellet, because you're burning diesel to harvest the small trees that then get shipped by truck that burns diesel that goes to a fuel pellet operation that then loads out into a vessel, and then the vessel goes through the Panama Canal. So you got to figure out, okay, what's the carbon footprint of that whole, or carbon intensity of that whole process. But the late breaking technology that looks promising, and it hasn't been completely dialed in, is to convert wood waste into liquid fuels like green diesel, synthetic or renewable diesel, and even aviation fuel. And of course, the aviation industry recognizes that they've got a serious carbon footprint from burning, jet fuel, which is of course fossil fuel, and they're looking at ways to mitigate that carbon footprint. And one way is to blend in renewable fuels. And so I've got a couple of clients that are trying to basically perfect that process of taking woody material at 3-inch minus chip size and converting it into a liquid fuel that can then be blended and utilized as a low carbon alternative to fossil fuel. So
that's interesting.
It is interesting. Wow. And it's been tried. I mean, I was shipping forest chips in 1994 to UC Berkeley at the Richmond Field Station, and they were trying to convert forest biomass into transportation grade ethanol.
Wow.
And they were able to do it on a benchtop scale basis, 1 ton of chips into 75 gallons of ethanol at benchtop scale, but they never could scale it up to commercial.
I see.
100 tons a day,
Right.
200,000 tons a day. They were not able to do it. So it's been tried for a while.
I was invested in a company years ago that it was a Russian guy. He was a scientist. He came up with this alternative to fuel oil. And what it was basically pine trees out of Georgia were burnt in a controlled pressure chamber.
Right.
And they would take the resin from that. It's so flammable, and they would mix that with yellow grease, which was basically chicken grease from that, and they would mix in the third ingredient was the sludge that was coming off the biodiesel plants. Oh. And they would take all those three. I don't know exactly what the mixture was, but I called so many different cement manufacturing companies in the Midwest and said, if I can get my hands on this stuff as fuel oil, because they need to heat the concrete when they're making the big, like the road tubes or something, make it a little bit heat treated more.
Right.
So it has to be done with fuel oil.
Right.
Interesting. So I would say if it may take a bit of a different type of nozzle, but other than that, we may have to clean out your chamber before we put this fresh stuff in. And it may cost about the same amount of money, but zero emissions.
Right.
And they were, one after another would say, I don't care if it's even a little bit more. If you get this product, I want to hear about it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So people are hungry for it, but I just, there's just so many roadblocks. As a small businessman like myself, it was really tough. There's so many big wigs out there that'll just stomp you for even thinking about trying to, you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And you're taking on the fossil fuel industry.
I had to think that maybe they had a little bit to do with keeping shutting one step after another, but you don't want to say that out loud.
It's not easy at all. But considering obviously the West is on fire, we've experienced some extreme fire behavior. Heck, what was it, a couple weeks ago, Colorado, near Boulder, had that event of 80 mile, 90 mile an hour winds that was just blowing through and took out 1,000 homes. One of the most devastating wildfires in Colorado recorded history. And here it is happening in the winter.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. It's going to be tough. I mean, when I went to school at Cal to manage forests, it was I was hoping to be able to manage, growing green forests. Today, a lot of the work I do is post-fire and trying to figure out how to remove all this black timber and then restore that landscape. And I've got a couple of projects that we're doing that, and it is not fun. Working in a black forest is 180 degrees from working in a green forest, and a growing, active, wildlife intensive ecosystem, as opposed to walking into a moonscape where there is no wildlife and the whole scene is just depressing.
But the trees are just charred. They're still good for something, right?
It depends on the intensity of the burn.
Right.
In some cases, there's still some standing stems that able to take out and
grind up or
and put it to use. It can be for power generation, like I was mentioning,
it's already burnt, so
or compost or
right.
landscape cover. Trying to find a use for it. California used to have 4 pulp mills. Today we have 0. So trying to ship wood fiber to a pulp mill in Cal, not going to happen.
For paper, you mean?
Yes, for
and
pulp.
Those have gone overseas.
Yeah, I mean, doing business in California is tough, as we well know.
Right.
And what's happening is the pulp and paper business is a global business now, because of the advent of personal computers, laptops. People aren't reading newspapers like they used to. They're not using copy machines or copiers like they used to. So we've seen a real transition in the pulp and paper business.
That's
away from the traditional use of paper. Also, recycle is way up, of course, and it should be. Recycle makes complete sense. And so with that use of recycled cardboard or paper, the demand for virgin fibers has dropped. And bottom line is we don't have any more pulp mills or paper mills in California, unfortunately, which,
Well, even the one I know of in Michigan is down to nothing,
Is it?
Yeah. It's just dwindled down. There used just to be logs as far as you could see floating in on the Lake Michigan, and they would just scoop them up off of there, or they're coming into trucks, but they'd just be timber as far as you could see stacked up, and now it's just kind of a parking lot and a little bit of lumber laying around, and it's like maybe vacant. I don't know. It's like doggone. And I've talked to you this before. This is the reason why I started this podcast. What's next for us blue collar people that used to be tied into manufacturing and running the sawmills and doing the everything else. It's all kind of gone overseas. All these guys that worked at the paper mills and the pulp mills and all these, it's rough to see everything just disappear like that.
Well, it is, but I have a lot of faith in American technology and interest in innovation, as well as taking risk. And I think we're, at least as far as the forest industry that I know here in California, we're seeing a transition to cross-laminated timbers and the use of mass timber to build multi-story buildings out of 100% wood structure. And these aren't stick-framed. These are cross-laminated timbers that are very sophisticated and well-engineered and can result in an apartment building that is 10 stories tall that is almost 100% wood frame. No steel, very little concrete. Concrete's in the foundation, but the rest of it is wood. And that means 2 things. One is the industry has adapted, and the sawmills are adapting to meet the CLT, cross-laminated timber market and the mass timber market. And at the same time, we're upping the amount of carbon that is stored. We're storing carbon in these mass timber CLT buildings, which is good for the environment. Makes complete sense, and it's good for our forests because we're taking carbon from the forests and storing it in long-term storage, known as buildings.
Wow.
And then we can continue growing trees to keep things going.
Right.
So it's...
And one of my sons I was talking to yesterday, it's funny you'd bring that up, but he owns a big construction company, new home construction in Grand Rapids called Strong Arm. And he was telling me about one of his buddies was talking about a mansion that was being built, and almost everything was made out of laminated beams.
Yes.
Studs and everything. And he's like, can you imagine the cost of that lumber list? So I think maybe you're talking about something different. I think, is there like a laminated studs being produced now, or?
Well, they are, but they're not designed for the stick-built house.
Oh, I see.
They're more designed for engineered buildings that are multi-story.
I see. Okay.
And one reason for this engineered cross-laminated timbers too is that as you engineer these wood products, they have tensile strength and fire resilience that make them a good, safe building material.
Right. That's a micro lam. Is that what I know as a micro lam?
I am not all that up on the terminology.
Well, there's a lam beam that's a bunch of 2x4s that are all stacked up. And they're all glued together. That's a laminated beam.
Right.
I'm
sure that's part of this. Yeah.
Yeah. But the micro lam is vertical this way, where it's it's almost like a thick piece of plywood.
Really.
But it's a beam, so it can carry way more. Something like that.
Yeah.
So
we're going to see more of that.
It's almost like a micro lam type situation with just thick pieces of plywood, huh?
Yeah.
And you're saying different types of lumber.
Right. I mean, I'm a forester. I'm not I don't know a whole lot about how to transform a round log into square lumber or into veneer, but it's just what I'm seeing in the publications is this transition to more of a mass timber or cross-laminated CLT, cross-laminated timber building material. Yeah. And it looks really interesting. And I know Europe is also evolving in that direction. So, as the industry is evolving using smaller trees, they're coming up with creative ways to put together building products.
Right.
So it is pretty interesting.
So you do kind of look at it as like a farming type of situation, just a longer crop.
Right. Just a longer rotation.
Yeah. I remember asking my dad at the lumber company, where all this comes from. He said, well, it's all farmed. It's all farmed lumber. It's like, well, I'm not sure if you can buy that, all of it, but
yeah. I mean, and there is oversight. I mean, in California, which is not surprising, has the highest standard as far as forest practice rules. There's a very defined set of regulations that, as foresters, we have to adhere to. And to practice forestry in California, you have to be licensed. It's like a licensed surveyor, You have to have a license. And the state regulates those licenses, so you have to have a 4-year degree, and then after 3 years of experience, you take an all-day exam, basically, and then if you pass that, you're good to go, and you have a license numbers, which is what I have. Right. Or you can challenge it after so many years of experience. You can just say, hey, I'm good to go. I want to take the test, and then you take the test and get a license. So there's a robust system out there that regulates how forests are managed in California, and other states. Georgia also has a requirement for licensed foresters. Oregon has a very defined Forest Practice Act. So does Washington. So yeah, it's a pretty regulated industry. In fact, there's third-party auditors out there, the Forest Stewardship Council, for example, FSC, they actually have a program that audits forest landowners that confirms that they're using sustainable practices, so then they can market their timber as forest stewardship certification
Right.
compliant
I see that.
saw timber,
Right.
and then the sawmills take those logs and they make boards and they sell them to Home Depot or to Lowe's with the stamp that says Forest Stewardship Council or Sustainable Forest Initiative. There's a couple of third-party oversight entities that serve to audit practices to make sure that they're sustainable. But when you think about it, the logic of being a forest owner, of course you're going to want to manage your ground sustainably so that you've got a revenue source for yourself and your family. And so the motivation isn't to create a blast zone and just harvest all the timber and walk
Right.
away. That motivation is not there.
Right. You don't want to strip it. You want to make it sustainable for your family also.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a future in it.
For long term.
Yeah. Where they used to just clear cut. And
Long-term
now
revenue.
they just go in and select cut, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, it depends on the timber type, and I'm doing some work in the southeast, as I mentioned, and down there the prevalent harvest method is clear cutting.
Is it?
Yeah.
Southern yellow pine.
It is, and these are
just-
just plantations.
Right, right.
You know, it's corn. It's 30-year-old,
Truly.
40-year-old corn.
Right. It grows like a weed too.
It just grows. I mean, it's a perfect blend of soil type, precipitation, and if you'll notice, you never hear about wildfire in the southeast.
Those are probably the most flammable trees on the planet too.
Yeah, well, but with the environment, the whole Gulf Coast, and the humidity and other things, it just doesn't burn.
Right, right.
And they don't have lightning storms like we do in the Sierra and in the Cascade Range and the Coast Range.
They don't.
So they just don't burn.
They don't go 6 months without rain either, like
No,
we do.
they
It's
don't.
crazy, And where I come from, it's just you wouldn't be able to go a week without rain. It doesn't seem like.
No.
Here you go months and months. Like, how is everything still alive?
Oh, it's ugly. I mean, some of the
Turns
projects.
brown.
Oh yeah, it is tough. I mean, 2021 for the state of California was the most significant drought year on record
Really?
since 1924. Since 1924, 2021 was the
Wow.
driest year on record, and that really has an impact on a lot of things, including our forests.
Well, I've been here pretty near 8 to 10 years, and it's been dry the whole time I've been here. It's been a drought. Came in and out of it, but it's funny, when I got here, they said the Gold Coast. I thought it was because of the gold rushes. It's because everything's gold. The hills are just gold,
Oh,
gold
yeah.
and brown, and beautiful. They have their own beauty to themselves, But
Yeah, they do. But these droughts, just to wrap that discussion, are significantly impacting our forests.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it.
right,
A couple of projects I'm working on with clients in the central Sierra Nevada is tree mortality management. So basically, we have a contract with a couple of counties to remove dead trees along roads, county roads. The idea there is they're a hazard because they'll fall into the road or into the power lines. But also during a wildfire, you want these county roads to be a safe transport route for people to leave and for fire suppression assets to move in, right? So you want to keep those dead trees away from those roads,
right.
because they're the first to drop in the case of a high wind event and fire that were to come through. So, but to get where I'm going is to say that the tree mortality is still significant, and with drought years like 2021, we can see it in the work we're doing. There's more trees dying, which is sad. It's very unfortunate, but it is what it is. I mean, the good news is December was a very wet year. We got high snowpack. Snowpack means it'll be a good water year, and hopefully that snow will stay with us till late spring, and delay water runoff, so our reservoirs have water when they need them in the late spring.
That's the main thing, isn't it?
Which is a big deal. Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, the most valued resource that comes out of our forests isn't recreation. It isn't timber. It's water. Water is the most valued resource coming out of our forest. Right. And it's just the way we roll. California uses a lot of water with the ag sector.
Farming and sure.
Yeah, and then the domestic water supply, of course. And then there's the power generation, the whole hydropower assets that are out there. They're so dependent on consistent water from the upland watersheds.
Really?
It's a pretty big deal. Yeah, early in the last century, 1920s, 30s, 40s, there was a real concerted effort amongst the utilities, Southern California Edison, Pacific Gas and Electric, to install these hydropower assets and, to power up
for
the
electricity,
West.
You mean?
What's that?
For electricity.
Yeah, for electricity.
Kind of right.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Hydropower. And they're a very significant resource. Hydropower is renewable. It can operate 24/7 as opposed to wind or solar. So it's a big part of the West.
We've been doing that a long time.
Oh yeah,
we're good at that.
Really good at
Hoover Dam. Go all the way back. They're generating power from these.
Yep.
That's a great way instead of just burning coal. It's the thing to do, isn't it? Just keep shoveling coal at it.
Yeah, we're still burning coal.
Yeah, sure.
There's no doubt about it. It's
clean coal, right?
Well, coal's interesting, to say the least. Some of our clients have been utilities, and their business model has been let's take our coal plants and utilize wood, blend in wood to try and bring down the emissions.
Right.
The sulfur emissions, the mercury, and it's been challenging.
Has that been done? I think that's been done.
Yeah, it has been done. It has been done, and there was a big push to really ramp that up. It's been tough. As these coal plants have gotten used to high BTU, high energy solid fuel coal, and you introduce wood, which isn't quite as high energy, there's some engineering challenges with that.
Right. So like the wood would burn off first, and basically,
Right.
But it's hot, so
it works out.
Yeah. It balance itself out. Less smoke and crap coming out of those big old silos.
And I mean that's what they're trying to do with the fuel pellets. The wood fuel pellets is transition away from coal and into wood. And sometimes it's co-firing coal and wood pellets, and then eventually transitioning to 100% wood pellets.
Right. That was another product that we had talked about when we were trying to make that biofuel, that we could actually take ground up trees and take sawdust, and we could pack it, with this thick, dense resin type oil and make pellets that could go with the coal.
Yes.
And mix it all in.
Yes.
That was kind of the next step. If we could get the concrete or the cement companies to buy, that would be our next. But just couldn't get it to take off. But there's some great ideas. If somebody's got deeper pockets, man, oh man, they could really make some money in this. And I guess that's the bottom line always. Is it gonna, are we gonna get away from coal? Well, it depends on if the alternative saves money or makes money, or it all comes down to the dollar, unfortunately.
Well, it does. I mean, that's capitalism that we live with here, and not to berate capitalism. I mean, clearly it's worked, and our quality of life is pretty significant.
We've been working for this for hundreds of thousands of years to get to where we are, and people are still whining.
And they always will. I think. But no, what I think capitalism brings to the table is motivation to innovate. You know,
I see.
Like
Right.
what you were just walking through is okay.
Right.
How do we innovate to create this pyrolysis oil or this
Exactly
heavy
what it
oil?
was. That's
Yeah.
funny you know that
Oh
name.
yeah. that you would utilize as a fossil fuel replacement. I mean
Right.
that's classic innovation.
Yeah.
You know.
Just need deeper pockets to get something like
Well,
that rocking and rolling.
Well, you do.
Unfortunately.
You really do.
I had
And,
all the buyers that I could take. I just can't get the doggone product manufactured, you know? So
yeah, yeah. So getting back to the whole drought and the Wesson fire, I guess one thing I did want to bring up in our discussions is, there's a lot of emphasis put on climate change and how that is impacting a lot of what we do, and some would even say that it's severely impacting our the way we manage our forests, and it's causing wildfire. But I can tell you, to place the blame, in my mind, in my opinion, to place the blame on climate change is causing our forests to burn is missing the point. Really, what's going on with our forests is we've loved them to death from over the years, like over a century of successful fire suppression efforts. We have forests that, before the white man showed up, was supporting 60 to 80 trees per acre. And today, because we've been so successful at fighting wildfire, those same acres now have 800 to 1,200 trees per acre, and it's completely upside down. Way too many stems per acre, not sustainable. These trees are fighting for sunlight, for water, for nutrients, and we have to really change that dynamic. The state of California is about 100 million acres in size. Around 33 million, about a third of the state, is forested.
no kidding.
Yeah, is forested. And then of that, 57% is managed by the Forest Service. So most of our forests in California are federally managed.
Okay.
And they're doing the best they can. There's 18 national forests in California. They all have standards and guidelines that they work with, and they're all doing their darndest to change this dynamic of so many stems per acre. We have to get it back to where we were pre-settlement, pre-European man being in the West, get back to that 60 to 80 stems per acre. And we know that was the case because surveyor records, when the West was surveyed, you can look at the surveyor records because the surveyors took excellent notes for the most part.
Right.
And they would note, what the timber looked like and, where the property corners were relative to trees. So that was part of a very early record, and we have a pretty clear sense of what our forests look like before
As
we
virgin.
started fighting fire.
I see.
Yeah, and so it's going to take a lot of work. In 2021, we lost around 2.5 million acres to wildfire in California.
Wow.
In 2020, we lost over 4 million acres. So
Wow.
do the math. We've lost 6-7 million acres in the last 2 years out of 33 million acres that are forested. So we've got to turn this ship around and really be active in how we manage our forests to restore them. And we're really seeing a restoration economy in the rural communities that are located in our forests because more investments being made to get out there and thin the forests and remove those excess trees and get us back to that right stocking level and right blend of tree species. So much white fir, so much Doug fir, so much cedar, so much pine. That blend is very important as well. And so this restoration economy is evolving. And part of the company I work with, our consulting company, we're involved in that restoration economy, trying to figure out what to do. Well, first off, how to do this, how to thin those forests, what equipment is most appropriate, and what to do with those stems that we're taking out. Do we put it to power generation? Do you put it to composting? Do you put it to fuel pellets? Do you make firewood? What do you do with it? Trying to optimize the value to help pay for the restoration, right?
Right.
So we've gone from an extraction economy where there was just sawmills scattered up and down the Sierra Nevada, and those mills have closed now, to more of a restoration economy where we're looking to restore those lands after all those years of fire suppression and get them into a more healthy state that is fire resilient, so that when the next fire comes through, it won't be these 1,000 matchsticks standing up per acre that are just going to burn hot and cook the soil. It's more of that 60 to 80 stems per acre or so, say, that where the fire, instead of getting into the crowns of the trees, will just skunk around on the ground and burn slow and not hot,
Right.
and be more of how the Indians used to burn, or how the lightning fires used to burn before there were so many matchsticks standing per acre. So,
Well, that was something that I wanted to talk about too. It seems like, well, I mean, if we weren't here at all as humans, the forests would grow, the lightnings would strike, the forests would burn down, puts the ashes into the soil, makes a more fertile soil that grows back, burns down again. It's just kind of the cycle. That's the way I've always looked at it. Now, of course, now there's humans here. We build houses on the side of the mountain, so we don't want it to burn. But it would have burned anyways.
true. Yeah.
We're just kind of in the way. Like it's an inconvenience.
It is an inconvenience, and it's hard to recreate in those burned over forests. I mean,
Right.
So when you look at the economies of these rural towns up and down the Sierra Nevada and the Coast Range and the Cascade Range, how do you transform that economy from a sawmill economy more into forest restoration, recreation? You try to keep those forests from burning as much as you can, because no one wants to recreate in a black forest. I mean,
Right.
well, I don't know if you've been to Big Basin lately, but it burned over a couple years ago.
Right.
And my family used to recreate there. Well, we're not going to be recreating there for a while.
Right.
Because that park got hit hard.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a while before anyone really spends much time there, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Let's hope that some things are done up there to help restore that park. That's just an example. So, but you're right. Forests have been on fire for a millennium, but now we reside in those forests.
Right.
So,
Right. So, I mean, it's hard for me to say, well, it's our fault. We should clean up the forest. It shouldn't. It's like, well, it's kind of a natural thing. They almost need to burn.
And they do. They absolutely do.
Sometimes.
As I mentioned earlier, this is a temperate forest, Mediterranean climate.
Right.
It is fire dependent.
Right.
Fire's got to come through here and clean out,
Right.
the brush and the dead and dying trees
Right.
that need to come down anyway.
And there are actual trees out there that won't even pop their seeds until they're in a forest
That's right.
fire.
That's right.
They have to go through these cycles,
Right.
challenges,
Yep.
in order to, survive or
Yep. They absolutely do.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. So clarify a little bit now. Are you working for the federal forest, or are you working for the state, or did you spend most of your time? Now you say the forest industry. Is that a state type of thing, or?
So my experience has been in the private sector. So I've been working for forest industry. For example, I worked for a sawmill, and our mill was in McLeod,
Okay.
up on the side of near Mount Shasta, and what we cut was cedar. We cut incense cedar,
Right.
and it went to pencils.
Okay.
So it was pencil stock that was then sent
crazy.
all over the world. Yeah,
Wow.
it was very cool, and it was a fun job. And so my job was to procure or purchase the incense cedar logs so that mill could cut pencil. It also made decking. It made fencing.
Sure, right.
But the high grade wood would go into pencil, that was then shipped to 80 different countries to make pencil.
Wow.
And there aren't many pencils made in the U.S. because it's a labor intensive process. So what was shipped was the pencil slats that were used then to create the finished product, which is the pencil.
Right.
So yeah, it was pretty cool. I mean, we'd get pencil slat buyers flying into Mount Shasta, and we give them woods tours, and they were coming from all different various countries, but they always wanted to come to the U.S. to see where the timber was coming from, and so that was a great experience. Unfortunately, with the spotted owl issues that came up in the mid to late 80s, the supply of timber dropped off precipitously, and that sawmill is no more. So I transitioned in the late 80s from working for a sawmill company to working for a renewable energy company. And this is where I transitioned into power generation using wood.
Right.
Yeah, what was in the late 80s, and that was very interesting. But in 2000, I transitioned away from working for a utility group into consulting, and so now I'm part of a consulting company that focuses on managing forests for a variety of clients, from private landowners to Indian tribes to state agencies, county agencies. We also work for investment banks that are looking to invest in power plants, biomass power plants. Well, it's just we bring in sort of a risk assessment attitude as to, okay, this group wants to buy this power plant, so we'll go in with our team and figure out, does this make sense? Is the fuel there? Is the power plant running efficiently? Are the environmental permits in order? Does it have a power sales agreement with a utility group? Sort of an assessment approach, and then advise the bank, yeah, that makes sense. Of course, go ahead and provide the capital, the debt financing to make this happen, or no, this isn't going to work. That kind of an assessment. I also do post-fire restoration work. I mentioned early on. I've got a winery that we're working for now, actually a vineyard that was burned over in September of 2020, and it's a mountain vineyard, so we're trying to restore the forested part of that vineyard, and that has been challenging because of the steep terrain that's located on.
I see.
It's kind of a challenge. And then lately, we've been retained by communities that are concerned about wildfire. And so our approach is to come in, look at the existing vegetation surrounding the community and within the community, as well as looking at how the buildings and residences of the community are set up, and advise them on what would be an optimized approach to mitigate wildfire behavior. So we look at historically how's fire burned through here, what's the prevailing wind, what's the ignition source, is it lightning, is it railroad tracks, is it a power line, what is it, and then advise the community on how best to manage that vegetation, how to harden the structures, make some changes to the structures so that they're more resilient in the case of a fire. And that work is really started to ramp up for us. And I think part of it is probably the insurance industry has become alarmed at their losses and realized, we probably should be a little more hands-on here and work with these communities so that they're more fire resilient.
Right.
And so I think there's some pressure being brought to bear on resorts, on communities, and landowners to change their thinking and become more fire sensitive to wildfire, because it ain't going away. I mean, truthfully, climate change is impacting fire behavior, but also, of course, the way we manage our vegetation is going to be a key component. I've done a couple of op-ed pieces, opinion pieces, to talk about how and why we're focused on the vegetation, because when you look at the fire triangle, it's heat, oxygen, fuel. Well, we can't control the heat necessarily because it's going to be lightning or it's going to be some other event. Mm-hmm. Oxygen's already there. What can we control? Well, we can control the fuel. So let's get after that. And so the fire triangle is kind of the basic explanation of the thinking and the strategy to treat fuels. And there are some that would say, oh, this makes no sense. Why are we thinning our forests? Why are we doing this? But when you really look at the logic behind it, it makes a lot of sense. Why are we treating these fuels?
Right.
And thinning these forests?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting stuff.
Yeah.
We talk about the displaced worker, and you've mentioned a few different times how many sawmills are gone.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people there.
Oh, there are, and
there's a lot of towns there that got to just be shutting down.
Oh yeah, I mean I've seen it. I'm
sure you have.
In some cases, it's Appalachia West. I mean it's
truly right.
It's communities.
What's next for these guys?
Well, I like to think back on that restoration economy, because I really think a skilled workforce. There is demand for a skilled workforce to get into the equipment and operate that equipment and thin the forests, and that those kind of jobs are family wage jobs.
Right.
They require somebody that can get into the cab of that equipment, work those joysticks, and get out there and get the job done. We're seeing community colleges now with vocational programs that are focused on that. Shasta College in Reading, for example, has received some grants from the state, workforce development, and that whole thing is a big deal. And I think we're going to see more of it. We're seeing equipment evolve that is very operator friendly. Fully enclosed cabs, air conditioned, rollover bar, all the safety equipment, communications, such that it's not a bad working environment at all. And if you're trained up to work that equipment, you can be very, very productive. So
sure.
I think we're going to see more of that. I also think there's going to be an ongoing work for foresters and fire ecologists, wildlife biologists. I mean, our forests could really need some help, and I think the state and federal agencies are finally receiving the funding that they need. I mean, we're seeing
that helps.
Billions of dollars allocated for landscape scale projects and strategic projects across ownerships, across federal and private lands, working together to put in strategic fuel breaks, knowing that the next wildfire is going to come from that direction. So it's going to come in these months because we know from fire history how that works. Let's put it in a fuel break here and maintain that fuel break over time, so that the community is somewhat defensible
And working.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. I've been blessed to be part of a collaborative process where there were concerns about communities and workforce, such that in the early 90s, there was a convening of environmentalists, foresters, elected officials, and industry in a community called Quincy, and it was called the Quincy Library Group. Very interesting process. Came together in 1992, and the reason we met at the library is because if the shouting got out of hand, the librarian could be the enforcer. And so we eventually evolved into a conference room adjacent to the library, and we actually got a lot of work done. The first thing that came out of the Quincy Library Group was what was called the Community Stability Proposal. We wanted a stable community, workforce, fire resilient, and sustainable.
Yeah.
And the strategy was to take that proposal to the predominant land manager in the area, which was the Forest Service. So the Forest Service manages over 90%, for example, of Plumas County. I mean, there are counties in California where far and away the most significant land manager and owner is the federal government. And so the thinking with Quincy Library Group was, hey, if we can demonstrate to this federal agency that we have across numerous entities come to a conclusion, from the environmental side, from the forestry side, elected officials, industry, we have brought together a diverse group with a problem-solving strategy. And so we delivered that strategy to the Forest Service, and they basically did not accept it initially. And so by 1997, we were highly frustrated with this process. We said, okay, fine, we'll write our own legislation. So we did. So we went to the local congressman and said, hey, we want to create a bill to sustain a 5-year pilot project to implement the community stability proposal. And the local congressman said, great, let's make it happen.
Sure,
and
they want to see that.
Oh, they do, and he did. And to his credit, it was Congressman Wally Herger. He teamed up with Senator
Wally.
Go Wally. He was on it.
Right.
And he was great to work with. And then he teamed up with Dianne Feinstein, Senator Feinstein.
Sure.
So we had representation in the Senate, representation in the House, and between the two of them, the Quincy Library Group Sustainable Forest Initiative came together and was funded. So, but it went before Congress, and it was a really interesting process. This is how naive we are at the Quincy Library Group. There was 30 of us. We flew to Washington, and for a week we walked the halls
Really?
to promote the Quincy Library Group
Right.
bill. And it was just a fascinating process, walking the halls of Congress. I'll never forget it. So we were teams of three.
Really?
It was like 10 teams of
teams
three.
of three.
And very strategic about who we met with and who was part of what committee.
Information in hand.
And
you betcha.
photographs
Yeah,
and maps.
Sure.
And we were on a mission. and so it's a great story, because when it came up for a vote in the House, there was 428 yes votes. 428 yes votes.
Wow.
1 no vote.
Jerk.
And we had to ask the one no vote. Hey, Bubba, why did you vote no?
Exactly. Aren't you on the bus here, brother?
I know. We were really. It was interesting because his comment was, "Well, I agree with your approach. However, you didn't go far enough. You really should have advocated disbanding of the Forest Service, like make the Forest Service go away."
Right.
It's like, okay, thank
Not
you.
sure if we want that.
Yeah, we didn't. We did not. So the next question was, okay, fine, we have this bill, 5-year pilot project. Where's the funding? So we went to the budget committee, the head of the budget committee said, listen, we have this bill that just passed, 428 to 1. Where's the funding going to come from? The appropriations committee would have to weigh in on this. And the head of the appropriations committee said, well, listen, if you have a bill that passed 428 to 1, you're going to get the funding. And so there was $30 million a year allocated to the project. And ultimately the project was targeting a thinning regime, if you will, or thinning at the scale of 40,000 to 70,000 acres per year.
Wow.
Per year. I mean, we aimed high.
Right.
We had a 2.5 million acre land base that we were trying to treat strategically as part of the pilot project to demonstrate that this could be done sustainably, local workforce, and make these communities wildfire defensible. Make them defensible, and it went okay. Had some pushback from the agency, from the Forest Service. I think eventually they signed on. One of the challenges we had is that the Beltway environmental groups did not appreciate local strategies being generated. In other words, the Beltway, the large environmental organizations wanted their strategies coming out of Washington, D.C. to dictate how local forests would be managed. We were the other way around. No, local knowledge should drive how we manage these forests, not some dictate out of D.C.
Right.
And so there was that dynamic, and ultimately, the Quincy Library Group is a great case study. That 5-year pilot was extended to 15 years. So we got two extensions.
But like 95 or something it ran to.
Well, it started. The bill passed in 97.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
and then it took a year to get the environmental environmental assessments done to really start managing the lands. So it probably didn't start really managing the lands until 98, 99. Anyway, the QLG is a great example of locals trying to work within the system and come up with innovative approaches to restore the land and employ locals.
Well, how'd you feel after that thing came down and you were on the winning side of
it was
400
cool.
and something to 1? And
it was really cool.
That's cool. You really made a difference.
Well, it did. And the reason I was asked to sit in on this is because I represented the renewable energy side of things with the power plants. I had 3 biomass power plants, and I was the fuel manager for those plants. So
and spokesman now.
Well, I wouldn't say spokesman, but I'm an advocate.
You're an advocate. That's the word. That's
advocate. And anyway, the QLG produced a lot of forest material, some of which went into the power plants.
I see.
And that's why I was asked to sit in on this.
As these pellets, you mean?
Yeah, well, actually, as chips, 3-inch minus chips. Basically, you
Just raw wood chips.
yeah, it's just
Oh, no
wood
kidding.
chips. That's all they burn is wood chips.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it doesn't. They don't require pellets. It's basically taking those small stems and running them through a chipper into a back of a trailer, and you take that 40-foot trailer and you just drive it to the power plant, and then we put it on a ramp and tip it, and it dumps into a bin, and then that bin plays out into the inventory, and the chip inventory is drawn down, goes into the furnace, and is burned in that furnace, if you will, with complete air emission controls, of course, very sophisticated. But the idea here is to create enough heat to convert water to steam and then spin that turbine. And that's a technology is well proven, and it's working today. Today there are 22 biomass power plants operating in California.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
Holy cow.
22. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Oh, it is. It is. And
You've seen that from the beginning, huh?
It's a great technology. No, I was just pleased to be part of it.
Yeah.
So my role in the 80s was I was hired by Pacific Energy, Renewable Energy Group, and they had hydropower plants, they had geothermal power plants, and they had wood. And so I was part of the wood group. Oh, and they also had landfill methane gas recovery, where you pull methane out of old landfills, take that methane as a gas, and burn it in a big internal combustion engines to create power. So again, geothermal, hydro, landfill gas, and then wood. I was part of the wood group, and so in the 80s, as part of that company, we developed biomass power plants, and then once the plants were built, I was assigned the task of going out and procuring or buying the wood fuel, those chips, those 3-inch minus chips, into the power plants to keep them going. So
and that wasn't mixed with coal; it was just
no,
straight in, huh?
Just straight like wood, just straight wood. And what the way it worked is the power produced was more valued in the marketplace because it was renewable
and clean,
clean, as opposed to fossil fuel fired.
As opposed to it's not clean
material. Yeah, but at any rate,
in comparison,
so that allowed the power plants to operate under 30-year contracts to sell power, and so the revenue stream was consistent and predictable. So the investment could be made to build that $200 million plant, because they knew they had a 30-year contract to sell the power, generate the revenue to pay down the debt. And so my job was go out and find the wood. So I worked with sawmills, I worked with landowners, and that was the most fun, was working with the landowners, because then we could go out and design thinning projects to take out those small stems and chip them up and put them into the power plants. And that was very rewarding.
Yeah. Long-term relationships. You've
yes.
got friends, probably. Yeah.
Long-term contracts.
Oh yeah. Right. Sure.
Yeah. Long-term contracts, and in some cases, these power plants were built so quickly that there was no supply chain in place, and so the company said, "Okay, Tad, here's a budget. Go out there and buy the equipment to actually get into the woods and start thinning these forests." So I actually had a crew that went in and felled the trees and skidded them into a roadside landing and chipped those trees on the landing and then trucked them into the power plant. So I could go to a landowner and say, "Listen, we have the equipment and the skilled staff to start this project. If you're interested, we can do this. And here's a 3-year, 5-year contract." And we went out and did it, and it was good.
Right. Wow.
We did a lot of good work. We thinned a lot of acres.
Right. I bet. Yeah.
And they're still doing it. Those 22 plants are doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah. which is great.
Well, I don't want to get too political. I just kind of an overview. It's like if you listen to one side, they say, well, we're going to go with this all green deal. And then the other side is going, well, doggone, we only got about 30% of what we need to use as a society coming from green fuel. So it's like, but I talked to you and boy, it sounds like we're really on our way.
I think we are. I really do. I think we are on our way. And there's absolute sustainable practices to confirm that. The technology isn't fully there to convert, excess forest biomass into liquid fuels yet, but it's coming.
Right,
Some of my clients are, absolutely investing in those technologies, and they hope to perfect them at some point.
Yeah. People talk about, we can't get rid of fossil fuels. We need plastic. Well, now I see they're finding ways to make plastic from plants.
They are, yeah.
And it's biodegradable. It
It
doesn't
is.
hurt the environment. How about that?
Yeah. How cool is that?
I think that was one of the main hurdles, I think, in getting away from fossil fuels, is all the extra byproducts. Of course we use it to trucking and, but that's a small percentage of what we use fossil fuels for.
Well, it is. And that's interesting. We have a client in the Bay Area, and their business model is, hey, the Santa Cruz Mountains just burned up. San Mateo, parts of San Mateo County are forested, parts of Contra Costa, Alameda, and so this client would like to put in a small bioenergy facility in Santa Clara County, and what they're thinking is, let's take this excess forest biomass from power line clearing, from putting in fuel breaks. Let's take that in and utilize it to create power, compost, biochar. Biochar is like, think of it as charcoal.
Yeah.
And when created in a very controlled furnace, you can dial in the soil amendment capacity of that biochar to really add value, because it'll be able to retain nutrients as well as sequester carbon when you incorporate the biochar into the soil. So anyway, back to the business model is, let's create a small power plant that provides a charging opportunity for the trucks that are deployed to go out and get the wood waste and bring it back. So they want to create an electric fleet of vehicles to mitigate any air emissions, that might have been generated by trucking the wood waste around the Bay Area. And that resonates, because when I interview land managers that create this wood waste that could be used, all of them said, hey, we're concerned about the carbon footprint of removing wood waste out of the forest and then trucking it using diesel equipment to a processing site. If there's any way to mitigate that carbon, reduce the carbon intensity, we're in,
Right.
So when I delivered that to our client, the client was like, oh, okay, fine. We'll work on an electric
Logistics.
fleet. Yeah, an electric fleet
Right.
that will be the supply chain to sustain this little facility. So, that's innovation. They're willing to innovate and invest in that innovation. So that's for me. It's clients like that I am really pleased to work with. It makes me getting up in the morning, going to work. It's like, oh, okay.
Right.
I've got these clients that are
More about the almighty dollar, I think. is what
well,
you're-
yeah, that and they're problem solvers.
And they're concerned.
Yeah, they're
Right.
and they're yeah, they're
Right.
concerned.
How about that?
And so employing people, employing the right technology, they're doing the right thing,
Training people, right?
which is cool.
Yeah.
So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah. Well, there was I was just thinking of so many other products out there, you know, when I was doing the biofuels, it was almost like a biodiesel, but it was a little thicker. And boy, if we thinned that down a little bit, we came up with the, back in the logging industry or anybody that's working out in the woods, they kind of take a big tanker and they fill it full of diesel fuel and they spray it down all over the dirt roads to keep all of the
Dust abatement.
Dust.
Yeah,
you
dust
know, and I thought, well, doggone, I have here a diesel fuel that it's not going to hurt the environment. It's like you could fill these tankers up and do it that with them. That would be an amazing idea.
That would, yes.
I
completely agree.
They're just spraying diesel fuel, driving down the roads through the forest. Like, are you kidding me?
How wild is that?
Right.
Yeah. And I've seen that done. Absolutely right. Yeah.
Right.
But
that's a head scratcher.
Right. So your response is that this pyrolysis oil could have been used because it's thick and it's almost syrupy. You can lay that down.
Right, but if you mix that with a chicken fuel, you know, or that kind of thing, or thin it out even more with a water or whatever you do, and you know, it just suppresses the dust off of the roads, you know, I guess is all they're trying to do.
That's exactly what they're trying to do.
And if it lasts for 2-3 weeks, great.
Yeah.
And they'll just do it again.
Yeah.
You know, so, I mean, there's just, you know, and that's just my stupid little mind. There's got to be so many thousands of different little products that you could, you know, do with that, you know.
Yeah. I would agree.
There's money in it, I guess is what I'm getting at.
There is.
It's more than just conservation, but there's, you know, and people are, you know, like I said about the cement companies, they want it. They don't care even if they had to spend a little bit more money, you know, because, you know, they're being conscious now. They're waking up a little bit to just, you know, destroying the earth.
Now, so speaking of innovation, we're also working with a client that is seeking to take orchard wood. So there's like a couple million acres of commercial orchards in California.
Right.
And they all have a rotation age.
I see.
Where the yield of the walnuts or the yield of the almonds starts to drop off. So it's time to replace that orchard with better growing stock to get that land back in production. So we have a client that wants to take that material, chip it up, and use it as feedstock to create renewable natural gas. And so their model is to locate alongside of a natural gas pipeline and take this wood waste in, and with a high heat, low oxygen reactor, basically convert that wood waste into a gas, clean up that gas so that it's pipeline ready, and then inject it into the pipeline. And then you have downstream users, that are customers, that extract that renewable natural gas, and they can create power. They can use it for thermal, you know, industrial processes. But it's a really interesting idea because you have this existing pipeline, existing infrastructure that you can tap into to deliver the product. You don't have to truck it. The product, you're pipelining it.
Would it actually dilute with what's already going through there?
It would.
Oh, I see, right.
Yeah. But as long as it meets the standard of the natural gas specifications, you're good to go. And you just track how much volume you're putting into that pipeline so that the downstream customer can extract that same volume out. So it's all regulated with meters and very interesting approach. I like it a lot, because you're not having to rail or truck the product, you know, and it's just really efficient way to get product to market.
It's already there.
Yeah, it is. And you're replacing fossil fuel.
And at the same time.
Natural gas. So we also have clients that are looking at converting wood waste into hydrogen. Hydrogen.
Wow.
Yeah, renewable hydrogen. And that can be a fuel for fuel cells. It's also I'm not a chemical engineer, but I think you can pipeline hydrogen as well. So there's some pretty interesting things going on on that front,
Right.
all trying to take advantage of policies, and this is a credit to the state of California. The state of California has what's called the low carbon fuel standard, and the low carbon fuel standard basically is a mandate for entities that produce fuel, primarily fossil fuel entities, that they have to incorporate a certain percentage of low carbon fuels into their mix. And so these low carbon fuels, like renewable natural gas, have a higher value in the marketplace because of this low carbon fuel standard. So when it comes time to produce that renewable natural gas, which is a low carbon fuel, they will be able to realize a higher market price than just standard natural gas.
I see.
And that's the incentive. So there's a market incentive that's
Right,
driving
right,
this innovation.
right.
So
That's the fuel,
it's
man.
pretty interesting. No,
You
those
know.
market incentives.
Exactly.
And in the case of California, there's an LCFS. Oregon has a low carbon fuel standard. Minnesota's working on one. Washington. So we're seeing California is kind of a bellwether state, making the case for this idea of low carbon fuels, and other states are taking notice finally, and so it's driving innovation. So
Wow.
people are trying to create these low carbon fuels to ship into California, or to create them in California and get them to market here.
Right.
So yeah, it's
Yeah.
I think hats off. I rarely say this, but hats off to the California legislature for going out on a limb and creating this
Yeah.
incentive.
Right. Right.
Which
Just gotta-
is good, and they have to be happy because the market response has been pretty good. People are actually out there trying to innovate and figure out ways to create those
Right.
low carbon fuels in response to that standard.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. I've been saying that for years, man. Hopefully our next generations, we have enough smart kids coming up that it can fix all the knuckleheads from the last 4 or 5 generations
Yeah,
of greed and capitalism.
You're an optimist, Steve. and you have to be in this day and age, because
Right.
we all have
We
kids.
got grandkids, sure.
We want our kids to
right.
do well.
Yeah. And healthy and
Absolutely, yeah. Healthy environment, healthy workforce.
Sure.
Got to be able to, sustain your family.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's scary, my dad's lumber company that I grew up in is a parking lot now. My grandpa owned Sparks Belting Company, and they sold that on the New York Stock Exchange after he sold it to his employees. And now it's gone.
Is it?
It's still on the New York Stock Exchange, but it's not here. It's gone.
Huh.
It's like, what's going on? I mean, it's all going to be box stores. Everybody has to work for Walmart and Home Depot.
And Amazon.
Yeah, I mean, what happened to God? I had an amazing childhood. Working back in the truss room and building custom doors and fishing out the best cedar and redwoods for the clients that I was waiting on, or it was just a specialty type of lumber store that you wouldn't be able to find that stuff anymore. And as a remodeling carpenter, I go in to remodel somebody's house, and the grain from the lumber from 80 years ago compared to what the grains on a pine board now are like 3/4 of an inch apart compared to that beautiful old pine they used to have.
Right.
It's just not even close. It's
Right.
so ugly. It's like you almost have to paint it.
You do.
It's too bad, because pine's a beautiful piece of lumber,
Yeah, it is.
Not when you cut into a piece of trim, I guess.
No, I mean,
Is that because of a farmed situation? Is it because are they giving them chemicals to grow them faster? Are they cutting them down maybe smaller than they were back then? There was larger stock in the woods.
right. I mean, the first rotation, the first harvest were these big trees that were had really tight grain because they were older trees, and they weren't managed forests. Today with plantations, you're growing trees at 12 foot, 16 foot intervals, and they're of course selected for their genotype. They're genetically superior
Right.
stock that you're starting with, so they're just jumping out of the ground. And you're right, they're growing half inch, 1 inch to a ring,
Right.
and that tight grain is just not there.
Yeah. Genetics not for beautiful lumber. Genetics for fast growth.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And they can kind of mess around with that in the science too, can't they? Like the foods and everything else.
GMO.
GMO. Right.
Yeah, but there's certain inroads have been made. As a forester, when I was younger, as I was working out in the woods, I was told to look for the superior trees out there, the straighter stems, the more conical crown, the faster growing trees, and then we would select those trees to collect cones. So that was taking the cones, extracting the seeds from the cones, putting them through the nursery, and growing those trees. So we were constantly selecting for superior trees that way, and that evolved over time, and that's what's done now. Is you can actually, from that genetic selection, grow a seed orchard. You can grow just an orchard of superior trees
just for the seeds
that you can then pull the cones. Yeah. That is done.
That's amazing.
That type of propagation, and it works well. So I don't consider that GMO. I just consider it selection.
Yeah.
You're just selecting for certain traits. Straighter stems.
I had a fellow come in here, a client of mine, and he said he was just in town for a little bit. He had invented something, and he was trying to sell it to market. Well, what do you got? He says, well, I've got this liquid that you spray on the base of the trees that are anywhere near the power lines. And for the next 3 years, these trees will only grow out, and they'll get bright green, but they won't grow any taller. But every 3 years, they have to go back and respray around the roots. It doesn't stop the tree from growing. It just goes outwards, gets more healthy looking, but it doesn't grow up. It's like, what? Do you know how much you can save as far as being a power company? Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
But and he came back a week later and said, I sold it. State of California bought it.
Right on.
God, fantastic.
Good.
But as a lumber guy, I'm like, there's something going on there. How do you get a tree to not grow but not die?
Oh, yeah. But you know what that is? That's indicative of how frustrated the utilities are because of these power lines that are starting fires.
Right.
And they're looking for a suite of options to address this. It's one thing to prune the trees, but they're going to keep growing. Well,
every year they got to come back and attack those same trees. Where this one, they don't have to see it for another 3 years.
Exactly.
Wow.
And so that'll be interesting to track and see how well that is received in the marketplace and how well it really does. I mean, I
want to run that tree through a sawmill in about 6 years and see what that grain looks like. I bet it's pretty intense.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think what the process would be for a chemical to induce slower growth.
It's a head scratcher for me, right?
What
would it make it denser?
Takes place.
Right?
I can't imagine.
What makes a tree grow taller?
Right.
Probably the center grain, the center.
Well, of course, the heart is dead, and that's the structure that holds the tree up. It's the cambium layer on the outside of the tree, just inside the bark, where all of the nutrients go up from the roots and get in, get the tree to grow, and then of course the leaves or the needles are taking in CO2, converting that to oxygen. I mean, it's quite a process. But this chemical spray, it must be getting into the root systems to inhibit growth, yet not kill the tree.
Yeah.
So that's
a gold mine.
yeah, it's an interesting process. I mean, I can tell you some of our clients are utilities, and they're highly frustrated with this whole, trees coming in contact with power lines, igniting fires. It's just a nightmare for the utilities. If there's some way we can figure out how to transport power without having all of these power poles and transmission lines and
running through these dead trees.
Distribution lines. I mean, we can't bury every line.
No,
that's just not going to happen. But maybe there's some way a different way to transport power. I don't know.
Kind of Nikola Tesla, kind of just shooting it through the air. I think
that's
what he was trying to do. Wasn't he?
That's right.
Yeah,
and I thought that was brilliant.
It's brilliant, but he was. They just say he just wasn't right.
Well, if he could,
maybe he was.
Well,
he was onto something.
If he could have perfected that would have really solved
for sure
a big problem.
Yeah, right.
One approach to this is rather than having huge centralized power generation facilities, have smaller distributed facilities so your generation is distributed and you don't have the need for these 500 kV transmission lines all over the countryside. Just have these smaller power plants serving communities, and that would at least mitigate the transmission system and
bring jobs, bring everything else. I hate to keep bringing that, but by God, let's get something going.
Absolutely,
little tiny power plants all over.
Oh, sure,
great.
Yeah.
Whatever it takes.
And solar panels on every roof.
Right.
That the whole solar power industry it's a big deal.
Yeah.
It really is. And I don't know if you've seen the news, but the utilities are pushing back now, saying that hey, the residential solar power users are getting an advantage because the rate structure is such that those homeowners are able to sell their power back into the grid, and the utilities are rethinking that. We have to adjust that rate schedule because it's not fair that those folks with solar panels get this rate, and other folks that don't have the panels are underwriting the cost of those solar panels that these homeowners have installed. And so I'm one of those homeowners. My wife and I had solar system put on our roof 2 years ago, and we did that based on a rate schedule that PG&E was offering. And basically we have a 6-year payback on that solar system. Now the utilities are rethinking, including PG&E, rethinking that rate structure such that if they get their way and the Public Utilities Commission signs off, then the payback period is going to at least double to 12 or 14 years. So, if you're a blue collar family that have the resources to invest in solar, but at a 6-year payback can make it work, but at 14 or 12 or 14 year payback, it makes no sense. You're not going to do it. So I'm a little troubled by the utilities trying to play this game of, well, we have to adjust the rate schedule when I made this investment significant in the solar panels based on 6-year rate schedule, but now it's going to be 12 or 14. So I hope the legislature and the governor see through that and
I hope so.
Bring it back in.
It doesn't seem right.
It's bizarre. It
just doesn't seem right because you are putting money, you're putting a downstroke down to buy all of this equipment to make power for your neighbors.
Yeah.
Aside from yourself, but you're taking in more than what you need to use.
That's right.
So you feed it back in.
Good point.
To conserve.
Yeah.
To help your neighbors, and so we don't have to burn so much coal and that kind of thing. It's not a fair way to attack it from their point of view.
No,
I wouldn't say. I don't know anything about it, but I'm just kind of looking at it from the outside.
It's just a frustration. You we've seen this in the news last couple of days about this issue. But that's an interesting sector, the whole solar sector. We're seeing more and more people invest in those panels on the roofs, and then investing in energy storage. Power walls. Tesla has what's called the power wall, where you can basically store power on site. But also, the next generation of electric vehicles are going to be able to discharge into the house. In other words, you charge up that F-150 Lightning that Ford's going to have, and you use your solar panels, or you just plug into the wall and get it charged up. If power goes out in your house, you can actually turn around and tap the power in your truck to power your house. I think that's brilliant, and it makes sense that you're able to discharge the power if you need to out of your vehicle.
Wow.
So
you could, if you worked at a company that had a charging station for your car, you could plug that thing in all day long while you're at work, go home and just turn your house on.
Now you're thinking, yeah.
You wouldn't have to
think of it.
The guy that you work for is basically paying for all your bills.
That's funny that you thought of it that way. Yeah, that is interesting. For me, in Carmel, we lose our power at least a couple times a year. For me, there was a stretch where we had no power for like 4 days. So I was having to go to the library in downtown Carmel because they had power. So I could charge my phone, and I could charge my laptop.
Oh,
and, it was just an issue. We lost everything in the refrigerator, in the freezer, of course. But if I had an electric vehicle that could have saved me that headache,
right?
Because it could just charge into the house,
as opposed to some massive generator that's burning fossil fuels and just rattling and
right.
rolling and roaring at your neighbors.
That's what our neighbor has, actually.
Sure, right?
Yeah,
I'm sure everybody does out there.
She's got a natural gas-fired unit. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. A lot of our neighbors have those.
Right.
But I think we're seeing this evolution of the electric vehicle that it's going to solve that problem, which is pretty cool.
And that's always the future, is the batteries. I think I've talked about that before. When I was a kid, that was the main thing. You want to either go into batteries or you want to go into magnetics. So if you can run a train and it's not touching the ground just by a little bit, by run off of batteries and magnetics, keeping it floating off the ground so there's no drag. You can get that thing going 100 miles an hour with no drag, run on batteries. It's the way of tomorrow.
It is.
For sure,
Yeah.
This is going to be an interesting trip. Hopefully, we're not going to be long enough to see it, in the next 100 years, but it's going to be interesting. They're going to look at us like we're idiots. It's cavemen back then, right?
Neanderthals. No, I agree with you. Yeah. It's going to be an interesting ride. Our kids are going to see some interesting times.
Right.
That's for sure. And this whole climate change thing, it's a real concern, and our kids are going to have to deal with that. And
sure.
I hope we haven't dealt them a bad card.
Yeah.
I would hope that they would look at our generation that we were at least trying to do some problem solving to mitigate the climate change issue, because it's real.
Sure.
It's absolutely real.
Yeah. I've heard scientists say that we have enough in reserves for fuel, and I was talking to somebody else about this, to destroy the earth. If we burned everything that we had in reserve, but they're still spending billions of dollars a year on new ways to find new oil. It's like, who's running this show? What's going on here? You've already got enough to kill us all to where we can't even breathe on this planet, but I don't know. It's a power, money hungry, it's just got such momentum going, It's going to take a lot for these kids to stop that,
Well, it is, but when you look at the way our universities and colleges are set up, I'm an optimist that the next generation is being trained up as problem solvers to help address some of this, and we won't get run over by excess fossil fuel use. I think we're going to see a transition. I really do.
Right.
Absolutely.
Keep our fingers crossed.
Yep.
That's all we got here.
Yep.
Holy
Absolutely.
cow, we got to pass this on to the kids
And grandkids.
and grandkids and for them to deal with.
Absolutely.
We didn't start the problem. I mean, we're too young. We didn't get this monster ball rolling. We are kind of probably the first front on recognizing that, hey, this is not a sustainable way of handling this,
Yeah.
We're not, there's a lot of people around the world that don't think like us quite yet, but, you got to set the example, get it rocking and rolling, and, lead by example.
Yes. Lead by example.
Right. So
Exactly.
that's interesting. Well, man, I sure appreciate you coming out today.
All right.
I had a great discussion with you. I've learned an amazing amount of things. I think I know a lot about lumber, but...
And I promise you I didn't make too much stuff up, really.
No, just a little bit. We don't have any fact checkers here, so it don't matter.
No, I really, yeah, that's right. I really enjoyed the interchange, I mean, this has been pretty freewheeling.
Yeah, right.
Which is great.
Well, people don't know how to hold a conversation nowadays,
No.
Sometimes everyone wants to argue. Let's sit around and have a discussion,
Yeah, this is good.
I just love it.
I have very little, I have no experience with podcasts. So
Sure.
This will be my first one.
Now you do.
All right.
You're a professional podcaster.
Good stuff.
All right. Thank you, sir, for coming
Thanks,
in.
Steve.
Hopefully you come in sometime and catch us up maybe a year or so and bring us the new innovations, what's going on, and keep us updated.
I'd be happy to do that.
Man, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, that would be good. All right, Steve.
All right. Thank you, sir.